Welcome to Vision 2222, the podcast where we explore the scientific, technical, social, and human changes that we might see if we were able to travel 2 centuries into the future. We interview leaders in science and technology and experts in business and the humanities to look into the possibilities of the future. Today, we visit with David Swatzell, who is an entrepreneur, a supposedly retired senior executive from Hewlett-Packard, and before that, Compaq Computer Corporation, and who now consults at the CEO level for large global technology companies. And in his spare time, David is an angel investor in music. Vision 2222 is the brainchild of Mikhail Gladkikh and his co-hosts, Amanda Chadee and myself, John Marsh. I'm an administrator in the materials science department at a major research university in Houston, Texas, where I get a ringside seat to the discovery of new materials, the new materials that will enable humanity to reach the future.
And I'm Amanda Chadee, consultant and mentor to early stage startups in biological and life sciences. I specialize in business development and funding strategies to support early stage startups in the big leap from lab discoveries to creating and selling a valuable commercial product.
And I'm Mikhail Gladkikh, your co-host. I'm a technologist and I specialize in 3D printing, digital supply chain, and everything related to Industry 4.0. In my spare time, I also write science fiction.
David and I had crossed paths in the 1990s at Compaq, but we hadn't seen each other for a couple of decades when we found ourselves working together consulting for a company that David actually came up with a name for called Material Intellect, which combined machine learning with material selection for aerospace parts. David, if you talk about some of the things you're up to these days, a little bit about your history and what you're moving forward on these days in your professional and personal life.
Okay, I certainly will. First off, it's a pleasure. It's a real honor to be part of this discussion. I have to admit, John, it was a little bit of a bait and switch because you promised me that Joe Rogan was going to be the person interviewing me, and then that's not the case. But that's okay. I'm really excited to be here with you.
Well, Joe couldn't make it. He had something else come up at the last minute.
He's a busy man, obviously. No. Thank you very much. Let me start off with a little bit of background. I have been really blessed in my career for having an opportunity to do a lot of very diverse things with a fundamental background in software engineering. My undergraduate degrees are in computer science and mathematics. Also went to business school, and I started my career as a software engineer, designing and developing large-scale online transaction processing systems, OLTP-based systems on mainframes in the financial services industry. That awarded me an opportunity to slide into open systems architecture and open systems design and development very, very early on in the early 80s, and really was a bellwether opportunity to do some extraordinary things that got the attention of a lot of people. In fact, one of the projects that's probably near and dear to my heart was the design and development of the first loan securitization and trading system for fixed income securities in the world, working with a gentleman by the name of Lou Ranieri, who was the vice chairman at Salomon Brothers. And these were brand new financial instruments. In our first day of trading, we traded $3 billion worth of securities. That got noticed by the Wall Street Journal and other publications, trade rags, if you will, and actually introduced me to Compaq, where you and I met. And so from there, I had an opportunity to bang my head up against the wall working with hardware engineers. So anyone who's out there who's a software engineer can relate to what I'm saying. Hardware engineers are a different breed. But at Compaq, I ran a engineering group that was hardware focused. So later on, during my career at Compaq, I actually pivoted to the dark side of technology, which is the business of technology. And I did that via working with McKinsey for 5 years, being the key liaison between Compaq and McKinsey and working on all the major initiatives and engagements that were in their portfolio with Compaq. So I changed my career to business strategy and technology strategy. So this would have been the mid 1990s, circa 1995, if you will. And then finally, to kind of wrap it up, I did 3 startup organizations working for 2 venture capital companies. And then I retired from Hewlett Packard in 2015 and formed my own management consultancy, which is a company called Notional, headquartered in Dallas, Texas. And we work with a variety of clients literally around the world, as well as entities like the Department of Defense and intelligence agencies. Currently, we're doing a lot of work in AI, ML. As you can imagine, everyone is chasing that. We actually,
by the way, for the listeners, that's just to make sure, artificial intelligence and machine learning, AI and ML.
That's absolutely correct. Thank you for that. But we're doing a lot of work in that area. We just completed a project that allows us to understand the hyperlocal risk associated with the transmission of pathogens. All this came as a result of, obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic, and being able to apply very sophisticated mathematics and layering in machine learning that would help us refine our estimates of risk, hyperlocal risk, and down to a 3 meter by 3 meter aperture, if you will. And there's tremendous benefit that accrues from leveraging a system like this in terms of helping keep people safe and informed and lowering the risk of overall transmission in a society. So we've been working with the WHO, the United Nations, CDC, NIH, other organizations around the prospective rollout of this, and we're looking at a potential rollout very quickly in Africa, interestingly sponsored by the CDC. The other thing we've been doing is we've been doing some work in the cryptocurrency world, doing predictive analysis of cryptocurrency trends, again, applying very advanced machine learning capabilities and deep learning techniques to estimate fluctuations or changes in price and volatility associated with cryptocurrencies. So that's what we've been doing on the software side. Personally, I'm out in Los Angeles right now. I'm actually in Beverly Hills communicating with you because I'm here because I'm actually working on a movie project.
Awesome.
Which is quite interesting. I don't know anything about the entertainment industry other than most of the content is really bad. But we're hoping to produce something. We have rights to a story that is really, really interesting. I actually have 2 projects going on right now. Both of them are biopics. So we're talking with executives at Netflix, at CAA, which is the largest talent agency in the world. We have an A-list screenwriter and showrunner working with us. So it is occupying a lot of my time, but it's fun time. And as you know, John, I'm also involved in music. So I have a band that I sponsor and help manage out of Brooklyn, New York. I'm always intrigued by the music industry. It's a passion, a love for mine. So I'm sorry for the long-winded intro, but that's what I've done and that's what I'm doing.
Well, this is just underscores the sort of impression I have, or knowledge I have now, I should say, of you, David, as someone whose very nature is future seeking. All of the things you mentioned, AI, ML, the convergence of hardware and software, and the things you can do with them. When David said 3 meter aperture, he's talking about the amount of space to which you could focus to determine an individual's risk of whatever is going on. In this case, it's pathogens. I would imagine that the machine learning doesn't care whether it's a pathogen or a bomb. You could probably use the same technology to assess all kinds of different risks, assuming that there's sufficient information coming in. data coming in.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah, and I think this is just remarkable, and I obviously want to hear more about it. It's just amazing technology.
Since we've come to know each other years after the time that we spent out together at Compaq, but more recently, I've been calling you an information architect because of the way you get to know your clients' needs, the market's needs, the way you see and understand the building blocks of solutions, middleware, hardware, and so forth. And then you build an actionable vision for them. And when necessary, you sell the client on the vision. Or in some cases, David, I'm sure that you get the client to back off of imagining that it can, cure world hunger in one step. But this speaks to me of seeing the future. Back when we were at Compaq, when someone ventured too far into fantasy, we called their creations vaporware. You remember that term?
Yeah.
I don't know if people still use that term. How do you go about architecting a plan that is aggressive, but without stumbling all the way into vaporware?
It's really a good question, John, because I think it speaks to an underpinning of fundamentals, kind of foundational elements in terms of, I wouldn't call it an information architect more than a solutions architect, of which information is a composite element of the solution, right? So a couple of things. As you were saying that, I was thinking through my history and my background in software engineering and eventually hardware engineering. And what strikes me today, probably more so than it has in the past, is how many of the fundamentals that you learn very, very early on in your career, and especially in a nascent industry like microprocessing and computing, which I was raised up in. So this would have been circa 70s, early 80s. How many of those fundamentals still hold true today? It's almost tautological from the standpoint that we find ourselves, when we're designing systems, regardless of the state of art respective to the underlying technologies that you're using, that those fundamentals come into play. Let me give you a great example. Obviously, advances have taken place in terms of actual data and information architecture themselves, but fundamentals with respect to how you curate, how you manage, how you interrogate information or data has not changed significantly, meaning that fundamentals that you acquire or curate early on in your career are still fundamentals that work today. There are things that you have to do in terms of design and testing. There are things that you have to consider in terms of user interface. Those things I don't think have changed radically. They've been embellished over the time, but the fundamentals have not changed a lot. So considerations in terms of the UI or the user interface associated with an application product, some of those same fundamentals still apply today as they did in the mainframe world or in the early days of PC-based solutions. So when I approach a client, if it is a software related engagement, obviously you start with the end in mind. And you start with the outcome that needs to be produced or achieved, and then you work backwards in the engineering. What's different is that today there's such a plethora of different tools and technology that allow you to arrive at the result much more quickly because you have libraries and libraries and libraries, code bases and functions and capabilities that you can lean in on. And the open source movement has done a lot, obviously, to help accelerate that and drive adoption of those things. But again, the fundamentals are pretty much the same. I can tell you that in my career very early on, the first thing that I sought to do was to build code generators that would allow me to accelerate development of application products even more quickly. And what that enabled me to do as a business person is to sit down, listen to the client, take copious notes, obey the first law or first principle of consulting, which is not to say anything, listen to your clients first before you open your mouth. Then to go back and leverage those code generators and the capability sets that I had created to do rapid prototyping. And on the next meeting, if you will, with the client, walk in with a solution that's probably 60 to 80%, which their jaws would drop. They would be very excited about it because you made the prospective solution tangible. You could show them something that they could relate to and spoke volumes to the business viability of that solution set. So personally, I won a lot of business by being very aggressive. You use that word, John, which is a good word, but being very aggressive about delivering solutions to clients and ensuring that there was a high degree of relevance to ultimately the outcomes that needed to be produced.
Yes, yes. There is an echo here in what you're talking about to other folks we've talked with in this series, which is looking for the solution and working back from that, as opposed to taking a piece of technology and trying to think of what you can do with it.
Well, and to that point, and I'm glad to hear that because that's something, again, it becomes a fundamental principle of solution design and architecture. But the other thing, too, that I might add is that, and I think you used the right word, vaporware, if you will. I don't know if that term is still used, but there's certainly a lot of hype around technology. I think as society has evolved and technology has evolved, there's a greater and greater appetite for extravagant, sophisticated technological solutions. So you see this avalanche of technology emerging, and it's really important, especially if you're dealing with clients like I do, that you focus on what's proven. Right? It's great to experiment. It's great to look at those technologies. But I see a lot of people that will embrace those technologies without really understanding the implications of those things, whether it is terms of a constrained feature function set that they may not be aware of, or an implication with respect to the impact on infrastructure and the ability to be able to scale a solution. But there's a lot of stuff out there. So sticking with what's proven, continuously exploring and going through the discovery process to discern newer technologies that you can envelop in a solution set is always good, but it's important to stick with what you know works.
So David, let's talk about something more specific. There is a term that both fascinates me and triggers my skepticism, and it's Metaverse. We've recently, of course, this week or last week, seen that shares of Meta drop dramatically because they are as yet unable to monetize their huge investments into this concept. And for the sake of discussion, let's call the Metaverse a virtual place in computer memory or in the cloud, supported by artificial intelligence and by other tools, devices, that interfaces that enhance our interaction with it and improve the experience. And as a primitive form of the metaverse is something like it's already using today, for example, when with virtual home tours for house hunters or virtual visits to different places around the world, different museums, they offer that right now. I remember in my experience in Baker Hughes and oil and gas, we've developed applications for training when people would go into the virtual training on the oil rig that is designed for that purpose. And instead of learning in a very hazardous environment, they can learn in their office and then be prepared for that. So there are lots of opportunities here, but there's also a lot of skepticism around the whole idea. And there's, I think, a lot of dangers as we think about a matrix-like scenario of people in a vegetative state living in the virtual environment. So what do you think? What are the possibilities? What are the dangers? What do you see about this concept?
It's a great question. I think it prompts, at least for me, a lot of thinking and deliberation around this as a societal element, as a technology to your point, Mikhail, that has tremendous potential, but I like the word skepticism because I think it's very appropriate here. So a couple of thoughts that kind of are top of mind for me. One of which is that we already, I think, understand and have had a taste of the implications of a metaverse environment vis-a-vis social media. To some degree, it is metaverse-like in that there's a synthesis or a synthetic element to it. A metaverse is a synthetic universe, right? And with synthetic universes come synthetic rules or virtual rules. And it really gets down to, I think, who are creating the rules, who are defining what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in the metaverse. And because it's humans doing that, we always run the risk of humans leveraging the technology, leveraging the experience for something that's not altruistic and not good. Obviously, there's really good applications. You know, I think I was just thinking as I was talking that it's kind of like a knife, right? I can use a knife as a tool for utility, right? To cut something, but I can use a knife also to harm someone. And so the question becomes, well, do we disallow it because of the potential of harm, or do we allow it and see how it evolves? And that's the kind of yin and yang. It's kind of the both sides of the coin that we see here, in that the applications for a metaverse capability or platform are tremendous. The ability to virtualize many things that we take for granted. I'll relate it to my music experience, in that I would love to have an opportunity to go see many musicians and many bands. Oftentimes I cannot do that. But if I could virtualize my presence at a concert, that would be amazing, right? And I could get a true experience similar to what I would get in a physical realm. I would love that. In fact, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, what's interesting is Paris Hilton, I think in 2021, I think it was New Year's Eve, sponsored a Metaverse New Year's Eve party, and actually had twice as many participants in that virtual party as they did in New York Times Square for the dropping of the ball. So, you know, you see that there are applications, there's pent-up demand, I think, especially with newer generations. I'm a really old guy, so it's probably less relevant for me, but certainly for newer generations who are much more technologically adept and starved, if you will. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for them, as well as for everybody. But again, we have to look at who are devising the rules, almost the physics of that metaverse, and what's their intention, what will they allow and not allow. And going back to the social media comment, I think it's safe to say there's many people that believe that elements or forms of speech have been curtailed in social media environments, and that's because of the rules of the people that host that particular environment. Would we see the same thing in the metaverse? I don't know. But if there's a tendency to do that in our real physical world, there's a tendency to do that in the social media world. My guess is that there's a trajectory such that there'd be a tendency to do that in the metaverse as well. So I think it prompts a lot of deliberation around who's devising it, who writes the rules, what is allowed, what's not allowed, and to do that in such a way where we actually allow people to be more free and to benefit, to accrue benefit, versus kind of the dangerous side of this, which is certainly dark and something that we want to avoid. So I'm kind of with you if you're saying that there's a positive side to this. There's also a negative side to it, and skepticism is something that we should all be embracing here. We should take a skeptical look at this as we move forward.
So I think it's a great thought, and I agree with you, David. Technology itself creates endless possibilities, and technology by itself cannot be good or evil. It's those societal implications and how do we choose to apply it and use it. That's where the dilemma arises. And this is what can lead to potentially good or bad scenarios, right?
Well, the same argument right now is being applied in the AI world, right? There are people like Elon Musk and others who are very concerned about the ethics that are woven into the application of AI-based solutions. And there's other folks that look at it more altruistically and they see nothing but upside and benefit. But again, to your point, it depends on, who's at the steering wheel driving this. And to your point, it's not the technology, it's the people behind the technology.
Right. And with AI, there's a different concern that at some point, it's not going to be the people behind the driving wheel.
Yeah.
So it's a different thing.
Right.
Absolutely.
You're talking about the machines taking over.
Machines taking over, right? So
Right.
AI, there is an event, I forgot how they call it, when AI in general becomes better than a human being in everything that human being can do.
I think it's called a singularity.
Singularity, right? Singularity. Yeah. You're right, John. So when that happens, what does it mean? And what will happen to humans? And that's what people are, all sorts of doomsday scenarios, and nobody knows. People speculate, but
it's the topic of many movies, right?
Right.
For everybody on this podcast, the simplest of AI is smarter than me. I just wanted you to know that.
Says the guy who earns a nice living consulting. So,
well, the thing is that you can build an AI that will be better than human in a very specific area. Like there's an AI that can play chess better than any human, or go or do whatever calculations or remember vast amounts of information. But you cannot, at this point, there doesn't exist a general AI that in general is better than a human being in everything that we do. That's, I think, that the fundamental step change, that if it happens, then there are all sorts of potential scenarios possible.
Well, so far we've been talking about some of the philosophical and in a sense political aspects of the higher technologies, such as right to free speech versus right to not be bullied, and is a big topic in the social media space. But what about the notion of making a living too? This is one of the things that I wanted to ask David, because David, you're heavily involved in helping a musical group. Yet on the other hand, we have Spotify, and I'm an avid user of Spotify, but Spotify and other platforms like that are notorious in not really paying back the middle players. The wealthy, already popular musicians continue to make money, but the ones who are trying to make a mark have a tough time. So what are some of the things that we need to do as we wrestle with this metaverse concept so that the people's real physical needs and their need to thrive are also important?
Well, that's certainly a profound question. I've had to deal with that in the music industry. Let me just speak top of mind and just lay out a couple of things that just strike me. Number one, I think what we have seen is a commoditization of the arts to a great degree, music especially being one of those, right? And what I mean by that is certainly with my generation, I have this conversation, by the way, all the time with folks that are my age. People that are younger, like the three of you on this call, probably don't understand this, but as we were growing up, it was really special to get your allowance, go to a record store, paw through the albums, the physical vinyl, and spend the limited resources that you had, the limited amount of money, on the one album that you wanted to bring home and listen to. And you would go through that experience and you'd read the liner notes and you would admire the cover and you would listen to the songs over and over and over again. And it was very much a different experience than I think what we're seeing today. And I think this applies beyond music, right? This applies in a lot of different areas where there's been this commoditization to the extent where, number one, the music is formulaic. You can almost guess what Taylor Swift will bring out on her next album. It's not radically different. And we know it's formulaic from the standpoint that the label is trying to optimize their revenue, and therefore they're catering to an audience that's less interested in really studying and listening to the music. And they're much more focused on background noise. That's what I call it. You know, it's kind of elevator music for the masses. But you get this phenomena where the business model has changed quite a bit in the music industry. And to your point, the top level artist, if I imagine the tiering of artists in any genre as being a pyramid, those top of the pyramid artists, they continue to thrive. And the reason they continue to thrive is because they have a huge following. They produce a lot of cash. They can market a lot. And their fan base continues to grow, where the real issue is at the bottom of the pyramid and where the artist struggles. And the struggle has always been there, but it's a different kind of struggle today because, number one, there's so many musicians, there's so many artists that to be able to ascend and propel yourself from a career standpoint requires that you get above the noise. Getting above the noise requires a lot of money. It's almost like marketing, right? If you've got a commodity product, in order to win in the marketplace, it requires a lot of education and awareness on that marketplace to be able to discern the product that you have, how it's ultimately differentiated, and most importantly, how do you personally benefit from that? And artists struggle from that standpoint. There's just a lot of noise in the system. And they also struggle from the standpoint that the economic model has changed significantly with streaming. Let's add the metaverse into this, and it's an interesting notion, and I think I alluded to this in my previous answer around I'd love to go to a virtual concert. Knowing that I can't go to the real concert, I'd love to go. It's the second best thing, right? It's not the first best thing, but it's the second best thing. And obviously, the third alternative is you don't go at all. So would I like that? Absolutely, I would like that. Do I think that there's profit potential there for artists? I do think there's profit potential, but it's no different conceptually than the marketing and the elevation of an artist in terms of getting above the noise. It's just a different kind of noise when we get to the metaverse, right? So if I have endless possibilities and choices with respect to how I can budget and spend my time, I still have the quandary of identifying, well, where would I like to invest that? Who would I like to listen to? Or what would I like to watch or see? And the same phenomena exist in art, right? I love art. In fact, last night here in Beverly Hills, I was at a dinner and there was a notable artist from Europe, actually from Geneva, Switzerland. And he was sitting at the table and I had an opportunity to talk to him and his wife. And what was really interesting, he was describing his art and the muse behind that, so on and so forth. And it was absolutely fascinating. But guess what? I never had heard of him, didn't have line of sight to any of his art. And for the first time, had an opportunity to witness or see it when he showed me some photographs of it. And it was absolutely spectacular. So how does an individual like that elevate themselves such that there's visibility, and with visibility then comes an attraction by the fan base or by prospective fans for that form of art? So the virtualization, I think, is not unlike what we're experiencing today in that it holds a lot of promise, but again, fundamental concepts around how do you market and how do you compel, how do you make people aware, how do you drive almost brand awareness, if you will, for something that people don't know exists is a huge issue.
Yes, and considering when you say noise, it's a real challenge for us as consumers to reach through the noise to find what might interest us. And in a sense, that's where I actually count on Spotify to feed me new music that I've never heard of. And it does so on a regular basis. But again, you come back around to who's setting the rules. In this case, it's not rules of engagement, it's an algorithm of how does Spotify decide based on my traffic what I like. And so you come full circle on the whole machine of an artist trying to reach. Now, something I've noticed that I confess I haven't played with, but I found artists that I really like, and then there's an opportunity to pay more to them. So then it's
Yeah,
almost like tipping. But I don't want to go
yeah,
too far
Patreon.
into the weeds on this because I think that Amanda has a really interesting question to ask too.
Can I just embellish my answer very quickly?
Yeah.
I'm aware of a group of late teen males, individuals, who formed a band. They are extraordinarily bright. They are in college, and they have been able to discern how to manipulate and how to lean into and leverage the Spotify algorithms. From that, they have created music that has just skyrocketed in popularity, and they are now quite successful as a result of that. So the other side of this, which is really interesting, is if we're in this virtualized world and the predicate to having visibility to talent is algorithmic in nature, then the question becomes, is the product that's developed by this group, is it, they're writing it and they're producing the product to lean into the algorithms to be commercially successful, but not necessarily artistically successful.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting phenomenon that's going on, and I think that whether you're talking about the influencer market, whether you're talking about musicians, where you can, in an algorithmic world, everyone's trying to corner the market by understanding and manipulating the algorithms. That's all I'll say.
Very, very good
Remarkable.
point.
Yeah. And so, David, we've covered your remarkable diversity of the projects and passions that you have. We're now going to chat a little bit about your ideas about the future. So when we think about the future today, there will be challenges in science and technology that we need to overcome to keep human civilization growing and to maintain this trend in connecting humans around the world. You mentioned some amazing projects in your intro. You spoke about the metaverse, the demand and the benefits, and also the risk of humans that leverage the AI and the virtual experience. The next set of questions is really a mix of imagination and curiosity about our future. The work you do now is quite literally bringing the future into the present. So please tell our listeners, what fascinates you? What do you see happening with the help of computers, cloud, AI, machine learning, and so forth? And we're going to start the story off of where this is going to lead humans. First, we can start with 50 years from now, 100 years from now, and in 200 years by the year 2222. Do you even think that humans will be still around, or will we be settling the solar system or other stars? So I know it's loaded, but we can just start off and telling us, what do you see as your vision for the future?
Okay, that was a question with 500 subordinated questions in which I really appreciate. No, Amanda, it's really interesting. Let me start off by saying I am not a futurist. I certainly have opinions on the future, which obviously is at the heart of this question, and I'll share in just a moment. I would suggest, John, that instead of talking about 2222, you talk about 2112, which is an album by Rush. It's a little bit earlier, but it's not as far out in the future. But for anyone who loves the music of Rush, they would appreciate that. Let me share with you. Let me platform the answer around what really concerns me. And this is a theme that I think stratifies across questions that you and John and Mikhail have asked today, and that is the convergence of artificial intelligence technologies and robotics. when I look at that and I embrace the concept that we will have an opportunity to further integrate technologies bionically with humans, again, that's something that holds a significant amount of promise, but it's also something, too, that can be quite problematic. What I mean by this very simply is that convergence between AI and robotics extends to humans as well, right? So I think a good example of that, I think Elon Musk has a company that has worked through and developed technology that allows for quadriplegics to basically interact with a computer vis-a-vis an implanted chip into their brain. So now they can secure a fuller experience by interacting with the computer through thought. And there's a lot of promise for that. And that's very altruistic. And there's certainly a lot of benefit that accrues. But again, the dark side of this is what do you do with the technology, or what could you do with the technology? As I look at that convergence taking place, much more so on the AI and robotics side of it, I personally am very concerned about the implications of that from an economic standpoint. So what I mean by that very simply is that if I look at economies, let's just take the economy in the U.S., there may be some debate, but I think there's general acceptance that the United States is a consumer-based economy. What does that mean? Well, that means that the vast majority of the GDP is basically generated through the sale to consumers or the transactions with consumers, and goods and services that are being produced have to be consumed and they have to be paid for and bought. If I believe that the convergence of AI technologies and robotics creates the promise to perform work better, faster, cheaper, then companies will gravitate to that, which then raises the question of what do you do with a mass population who needs to work in order to consume? And I look at this in light of the fact that there are folks out there that say, well, not unlike any other industrial revolution, jobs will shift, new jobs, new categories of work will emerge, and that's how we take care of the populace. Well, there's a couple of things that strike me with that. Number one is the acceptance, the realization and acceptance that every industrial revolution, what's been underlying or underpinning an industrial revolution is the exchange of labor with capital. Okay, so you go through, whether you're a 3-generation or 4-generation believer in industrial revolutions, it really doesn't matter. Every one of those revolutions have resulted in labor being displaced by capital, by machinery, by technology. So in this particular case, as we look at the emergence of AI and robotics, we will see the same thing. So I don't think anyone is arguing that. The question is, do we arrive at a point where, like the other generations, there's new categories of work and forms of labor that now become dominant, or are we at the end of that journey? What do people do after there's massive displacement of a labor and a workforce and the implications now to a consumer-driven economy? Because if people aren't working, they don't earn money. If they don't earn money, they don't consume. If they don't consume, the implications from a economic system standpoint are profound. And I think there's plenty of writings on this. I know that I've seen a lot of different theory that suggests that what we'll see then is a shift to a much more socialist-oriented, government-sponsored economy versus a consumer-driven economy. But it raises questions around, well, how many people do we need to sustain on this planet if we don't need a lot of people? So I think there's very profound questions that are emerging, have emerged, and will continue to emerge as we race towards the future here. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty. I'm certainly concerned about it. I'm concerned for my kids. Someday I'll have grandkids. I'll be concerned for them. But I think what we're seeing is the possibility of very tectonic shifts, not only in technology, but technology-sponsored movement in our economic, our government, possibly our legal systems. There's just a profound set of changes that I think are right in front of us that nobody knows the answer to. And again, not unlike the metaverse question, it prompts, I think, a significant amount of thought, deliberation, and planning. And so if I'm a young person and I see this tectonic shift or sea change emerging, how do I shape my life and my career such that I'm a benefactor from those changes versus a victim from those changes? I don't know if, Amanda, that helps answer the question.
No, it does actually. And when you say about the tectonic shifts in, economic, government, and legal, it actually brings me to the point of FOMO, the fear of missing out, because you feel like things are happening and you're not sure if, first of all, if you are going to be prepared within your lifetime. And then you think about your children and, how are they going to be prepared? And one of the fascinating things that you said was, and I also agree with, is the future of work, because this is such a big uncertainty right now. And how are we going to work with these technologies, AI? Are we just going to be, in this virtual reality? So these are all very important questions, and you addressed them remarkably. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for the question. I mean, it's something that weighs heavy on me. I've actually wanted to write a book on this. I think there's other writings, obviously, that address this. But
you can title it Vision 2222 after our podcast.
Right. or 2112.
Or 2112, yeah.
There we go.
But I don't know if you see the same thing, if you feel the same way, but I think the gap that exists between what we're certain of and what we're uncertain of, I think is growing significantly. And it raises a question in my mind whether we as a species are prepared for those kinds of changes. We've known that technology has accelerated changes in our society, in our cultures, in our personal lifestyles, all those types of things. But it's more than just an acceleration of the adoption and the implications from those technologies. It's also an amplification. And so from that standpoint, I just wonder whether we are adequately or sufficiently prepared. And to be prepared requires, again, a lot of thought. And I see less great thinkers today than probably what we had 100 years ago or 200 years ago. So where are the great thinkers? Who is working through these challenges and prospective outcomes that we need to all be prepared for? And it's that level of analysis and thinking that we will have to go through to figure out what's best for society. And there may be some gives and gets. A lot of people would say today that they're willing to give up certain freedoms to ensure more security in their lives. There's others that would say just the opposite of that their freedoms are sacred and they will face the consequences of a less secure world, as a result. And so these are big questions that need to be answered.
And I agree, yes. Are we prepared? So thank you so much for taking this imaginary trip into the future for us. And the next couple of questions, we usually ask all our guests this. Do you think that time travel is actually forward? And if yes, is it forward or backward or both ways? And if you had a chance, if a time machine suddenly appeared in front of you and you had a chance for just one trip anywhere on the timeline, it doesn't have to be within your lifetime, where or when will you go, and tell us why?
Okay. Well, number one, time travel exists today. I was here yesterday and I'm here today. So time travel into the future obviously exists, and we all experience that. Although time is elusive, it's something you don't feel, but it's something you can witness. That's arrow of time stuff, right? Obviously, time travel in the past is problematic. You have something called the grandfather paradox, which basically means that if you were to go back in time and you were to kill your grandfather, would you exist? So those paradoxes are there. I think those are intellectually stimulating. So in time, it's so interesting you ask the question, because I've been giving this some thought. I won't say a lot of thought, but it's an area in terms of intellectual pursuit that I'm beginning to get into, because I'm fascinated by the concept of time. Take, for example, if time is defined as a succession of events, then the question is, what is an event? And are we an event? Well, I would probably argue we as human beings are events. We have a beginning and we have an end. We measure the distance between those two vis-a-vis a yardstick called time. A rock, an inanimate object, is an event. It also has a beginning and potentially an end. So are we looking at a universe that is really, we look at them as matter, and we look at things in a physical reality, but I think to me, the reality is everything is an event. Everything can be denominated by time. It can be denominated by mass and energy. And so, and there's equivalencies that exist between all those things. And I think ultimately arriving at the core secrets of the universe implies understanding what those interrelationships are, not only between matter and energy, but matter, energy, and time. You ask about moving forward or moving back. Based on the dinner last night, I'd like to move back to yesterday. I'd probably choose something different on the menu, but no, skipping that. That was a little bit of really bad humor. I would, it's such a great question. I would not move forward in the future. And the reason why I wouldn't move forward is I think there's a wonderment, there is a beauty, there's this brilliance associated with the unveiling of outcomes that happen over time. It's like a surprise, it's like waiting till Christmas Day to open up the present, right? And right. So I probably would not go in the future. I would go back. And obviously I'm so curious about so many things in our world, but I think if I were to choose one time event that I would go back to, for me, I would love to go back to the creation of our wonderful country, the United States. I'd like to go back during Revolutionary War times. I'd like to go back to the signing of the Declaration of Independence and the construction of our Constitution. I would love to be the witness of that and listen to the arguments and hear the debates and just admire the brilliance of our founding fathers. To me, I think that would be amazing. And then secondly, my second choice would be to go back to yesterday and choose something different on the menu.
Right.
Are they not serving good food in Beverly Hills?
No, it was good. I just would have something different. That's all.
Well, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate, David, your weaving in the technology and the business and economics, sociology, the caution about what we're facing in an increasing era of robotics, AI, and what the implications are, what we're going to need to grapple with. It's been fun to go through that with you. And well, you should have picked the steak. But beyond that, if you had, and this may be a struggle, it is, and I'm not just picking on you, it's true of all of our guests, because we pick people who are willing to talk. If you could say in a couple of sentences some things you would want the audience to take away and remember from this podcast, what would you tell them?
I would probably say that we're at an inflection point, a profound point in the history of mankind, and that technology can certainly advance the interest of mankind, but everything is based on choice, and the things that we choose as individuals and a collective society as to how we move forward, how do we drive benefit to society, how do we take care of our families, our children, how we build our legacy. It's all about the people. The technology is secondary. It's about the people and about their interest and their heart. And I think that's what I would say.
Awesome. Where are some places, whether it's through the web or other ways of accessing information, where would you point guests? That is, where would you point our listeners to go and find additional information about the topics that you've brought up?
I'm very eclectic in my curation of insights and content. Interestingly, I use a technology to help out. I use Blinkist, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but it is, it's a book summary application. It's very cool. They distill books down to their most salient points. So you may find a book and the core messages may number 5 or 6, and they distill that down and provide a summary of those key points and a little background for each. I use Blinkist a lot to quickly go through some books and to discern whether or not it's worthy to pursue a deep dive into those books, and then I go into those books. So I use that tool quite a bit.
How do you spell it?
Blinkist, Blinkist. Okay. It's a great application. It's a mobile app, and highly recommend it. It's almost like Cliff Notes on steroids, but I use it not to quote unquote read the book. I really use it to get a synopsis of a book that's focused in a topic area that now will compel me to purchase the book and go deeper.
Right. It's sort of like an abstract in a sense.
Yeah. It's an abstract for sure.
Well, this has been a lot of fun to talk with you, David. I feel actually a little bit guilty because you also are buds with Mikhail, and I wanted to give the two of you an opportunity to comment with each other about this podcast and some of the things you've done together.
Yeah, well, Mikhail, he's much smarter than me. He's my muse. No, Mikhail, he's amazing.
Well, likewise, David. But the things you said about industrial revolution, industry 4.0, and what we talked about with relation to AI, this is dear to my heart, and this is what I'm passionately engaged in. And I think, I agree with you. We are at that inflection point. Where would it take us? It also depends on how do we position ourselves as humans, and all these societal changes and how people use those opportunities and applications that are being developed. I think this is even more important than what technologies we develop.
I think that's right. I mean, one suggestion that I would have is, and this is for the three of you, and John, specifically for you as the host of one of the hosts of the podcast, is you might consider creating almost a forum where there's 5, 6, 7 real thought leaders in this area. And the podcast is very specific to what Mikhail and I are talking about. And it's really the implications of this convergence of technologies on individuals and society and on culture. I think that would be fascinating. Again, it's an area that requires deep thought. And I think you can have a very lively conversation. Mikhail and I could probably talk about this for days. I'd prefer to do that over a glass of bourbon or single malt scotch.
Right.
But I think a podcast specifically dedicated to just this one topic area would sponsor a lot of very healthy and informative dialogue. And I certainly would love to listen in on something like that. That's kind of up my alley.
It's a great idea.
No, I appreciate it, David. I agree with you, and thank you for your time today. It's been fun.
Yes, thanks a lot. I think this has certainly exceeded my expectations, and I really appreciate your coming on board with this, David.
Yes, thank you so much, David.
Absolutely. Make sure that Joe Rogan is part of this next time, and I look forward to talking to you guys in the future.
I will scold him for missing this one. Yeah.
John, I think you do a much better job. I prefer you.
Okay, right. I'm going to hit stop recording now. Thank you for listening to this episode of Vision 2222. And if you enjoyed what you heard, please subscribe, like, and share with your friends. Please also comment, and we'll do our best to respond.